Rotary. Thank you, Rusty. Henry Baskins is going to offer our invocation for us.
Thank you. I'll read a passage for you. He has told you, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you but to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with your God? Please pray with me. Lord of all, today we acknowledge your power. We also acknowledge the expectations that you have of us. That we live justly in this world. That we show love and kindness toward others. That we walk humbly with you. Remind us as we strive to fulfill your expectations of us, that you provide the knowledge, the wisdom, and all of the resources that we will ever need. Help us to keep your service to others, not just words that we speak, but a lifestyle that we live. Now, Lord, we ask you to bless this food and let it use our energy to bless others so that we, in turn, please you. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Thank you, Henry. And I'll take your seats. Bill Evans is on his way up here to introduce our visiting Rotarians and guests. And as he's on the way up, I just want to remind everybody about the cart buckets sitting on your tables. Please give generously to the cart fund.
Well, good afternoon. We have some visitors, no visiting Rotarians, but we have some guests today. And I just wanted to say, I don't know if anybody noticed, but there was a spotting of the sunshine yesterday. Did you notice that? I'm also hearing that the druggists in the area are running out of Prozac, so if anybody would like to make a contribution, it'd be good. So we have some guests today. Could you stand up and introduce your guests? We've got a microphone going around the room there.
Good afternoon, I'm Carrie Powers, and I have with me today Thomas Taffel, and he is a fellow Leadership Lexington graduate, and he is with the Lexington Medical Center Foundation.
Other guests? Yes, right over here. Salvation Army.
Hi, I'm Henry Morris, and I have with me two wonderful people, Miss Sarah Newcomb. She is our Director of Director of, I can't get her name, Volunteers, Disasters, and PR. This is Sarah Newcomb. And Mark Barry. Mark Barry, who is our Director of Development for the Salvation Army. Please welcome the both of you.
Welcome. Thank you. And right over here, to my left.
I have with me my husband, John McAllister, who is listening.
Anybody else? Any other guests we have today? I think that takes care of it. Well, welcome.
I have one.
I'm sorry.
Introduce my child bride here, Betsy. So wonderful to have her here today.
All right, we got a lot. We got one more in the back. Yes.
Good afternoon. My name is Beth Bartlow, and I'm pleased to have as my guest Ryan Taylor, who is the fairly new Executive Director of the Nancy K. Perry Children's Shelter, Lexington.
Very good. Anybody else? Okay, last call. Very good. We're glad to have all of you visitors with us today. We hope you enjoy our meeting and our fellowship.
Thank you very much, Bill. And I just want to draw attention to the back table. We have our speaker's wife, Amber Daniels, with us here today, and their 1-year-old daughter, Ansley. So welcome to both Amber and Ansley. Good of you to bring your wife. Give the microphone back to Major Henry Morris now. Everybody remembers our bell ringing campaign that took place in November and December. And today we're going to celebrate that. The numbers are in. We know who the top top award winner's work with the kettle. And I'm going to turn it over to you, Major.
Thank you for allowing me to meet with you this time and to do this. I want to thank everybody for helping us out with the kettle season. It's always an important time for us. And we thank you for your love and your support in that endeavor. We want to take this time to say thank you for participating in the bell ring this past Christmas season. You know, the Columbia Rotary ran at 3 locations. Many of you were there. The Walmart on Forest Drive, the Greens on Assembly, and the Piggly Wiggly on Divine Street. And everyone that participated did an incredible job, and we thank you. We couldn't have done it without you. And we just want to thank you for that. But there were 3 captains in particular that led their groups to raise the top amounts at each location. And we want to acknowledge them at this time. And I'm going to ask when I call your name, you will come up and receive your, we have just a little token of our appreciation, little crystal bells that you can put on your mantle or whatever in your office, just a token of our appreciation. Mr. Hal Stevenson. All right. Mr. Howard was the captain with the best performing day at Greens, raising a total of $464.54. Our next one is Mr. Rusty DePaz. Come forward. Mr. Rusty was our captain for the best performing day at the Piggly Wiggly, raising a grand total, get this, $4,150.14.
I want you all to know that I cheated. The night before I was to ring the bell, a friend of mine who will remain anonymous, but I'm sure everybody in here knows him, told me that he had closed out a company the day before, and that he was going to give the money away to the Salvation Army. I said, give it to me. And it was, I don't remember the amount, but I told him I was ringing the bell the next day and that I would put it in the kettle. And it was $4,000 and some odd dollars. And I wish that I could tell you his name, but I don't think I should violate that confidence. But anyway, he is a Rotarian, by the way, and I appreciate you letting me cheat to get this one more time.
And our last one is Elliott Powell. Elliott was the captain with the best performing day at Walmart. He is also part of our advisory board, so we're glad to make this honor here. And Elliott's group raised a total of $631.82. I would also like to give a special shout out to Mr. Doug. Doug, come on up, Doug. We couldn't have done it without you. Doug spearheaded the whole thing, got everybody. We know that's not an easy task. So we wanted to give you a little token of our appreciation as well. We know it's not an easy job. As you know, Doug, he organized the Columbia Rotary Bell Ring this year, making sure that everything ran smoothly this Christmas season, and we're so thankful for your efforts in doing that. Thank you very much. Overall, when the Columbia Rotary raised a grand total of $11,423.65. And that is true truly incredible, and you should give yourselves that huge round of applause. We thank you for that. Now I'm going to ask Sarah. She's going to just let you know about the other captains.
Hi, y'all. Okay, so outside of those three who just won awards, there's a lot of captains who helped make it possible for what you guys all did during the Christmas season. So I just wanted to kind of name y'all really quick. So I'm just going to read off your names. We do actually have thank you notes for you here, so I will just leave those on this table if you want to come grab them after the meeting wraps up today. But really quick, so Carrie Powers, Matt Kennel, Adam Jordan, Blake Buchanan, Doug Cochran, Jace Heatherly, Libby Gober, Becky Earhart, Glenn Matthews, Wayne Cannon, Otis Brinkman, Wade Carlisle, Stephen Creech, Russ Bell, Anderson Bass, Tom Jackson, and Perry Orth, if you want to give them all a round of applause. It's all because of your effort, whether you rang the bell, were a captain, or whatever you did to help that makes it possible, and all that money does go back to help those in need in the community, so you make a huge difference. So, thank you.
Major, thank you so much for coming today to present that. Your energy is contagious, and it always puts me in a good mood being around you. $11,423, that's quite an accomplishment. Hal, Rusty, Elliott, great job on leading the club, and thank you to all the captains and everybody who participated in that, because I know it took a lot of fun. It took a lot of time, but I know it was a lot of fun too. So Rusty, it wasn't your grandchildren. That wasn't the reason you brought in over $4,000. Okay, well, you came clean. That's okay. Your sins are admonished. I'd like to welcome Andy Shane up. He's going to offer health and happiness for us here today.
You need to lower the microphone every time someone else comes up here. You might be the tallest member of our club. First of all, we have some health and happiness to share. First of all, Tom Counts had his first great-grandchild, Harper Ray. So congratulations. How many grandchildren do you have, Tom? Now you're your first grade, but how many grand now? Is he? Outside, okay. Never mind. I thought he'd come in by now. Sorry about that. And speaking of which, we have obviously at some point he's going to give away hopefully that great grandbaby. And Matt Kettle is giving away his daughter Liz this weekend. She's getting married to Will Shank. So congratulations, Matt, on that. And hopefully you can survive this weekend. And finally, Margaret Clarkson tells me that the Columbia Sailing Club will be participating in the St. Patrick's Day Parade as part of their kickoff for their summer camp program. She and Andrew are going to be doing that. I hope maybe some other folks here from the Rotary are going to be participating in the parade on purpose this year. So, if you are, whether you are on accident there, so I hope you enjoy your St. Patrick's Day coming up for sure. So, as I'm what to do, I have my own kind of thing for health and happiness, and I had volunteered to be on the Bocce Bash committee, so I'm here to talk about Bocce Bash. And you know, that's our main fundraiser this year. We're doing it with the Special Olympics of South Carolina. It's on April 27th at Segra Park. That's the home of the Fireflies. It's the new name of the ballpark for the Fireflies. And if, you know, of course, we're looking for teams, that's the main thing, but we're also looking for sponsors. And so, obviously, Blake Buchanan is running things. If you've got, you know, obviously a sponsorship opportunity you'd like to take advantage of, go see Blake, and he can hook you up with that. To register, there's a link on our website. But also, if you just don't want to do that, you want to Google Columbia Bocce, it actually comes up first in a Google search. Go figure, but that's great to be able to do and be able to find how to register a team for this great event. It's an all ages event. That's one of the things that we really wanted to push, was the idea that everybody can play this. This is for mom, dad, the kids, the grandkids. Harper Ray can come if she wants to, and so anybody can come along. It's really nice bringing the kids out for a day at the ballpark. We're going to be playing in the outfield at Segra Field, so here's your chance to be on the field and be in the same spot where Tim Tebow shagged some fly balls. The one thing I was thinking was that not everybody necessarily knows what bocce is and all of that and how this is going to go. So I'm going to go over some of the basics. There's a good FAQ, and we have some of the rules as well on the website. But you know, what you do is we're going to have teams of 4. And what you do first is you roll the pallino. That's the white ball. And pallino, by the way, in Italian means cue ball. You want to roll it halfway down, and this ends up being the target you want to hit. And, you know, essentially, bocce is just like horseshoes except with, well, you know, balls. So basically you're trying to roll the ball as close as you can to the Polino. And, you know, we're going to have judges on hand to help, you know, settle disputes. They're going to have rulers, believe it or not, to sit here and who's the closest. We also will have attorneys on staff to take care of any arbitration or potential litigation. I'm sure we have a few of those in the club. First team to 12 wins. If you lose, you got to run the bases, okay? I wanted to sort of demonstrate how it is to play. I just think it's really 4 simple steps to really how to play bocce ball, how to roll it. So first of all, you got to hold the ball. And these are the real thing. These are a few pounds. You know, this isn't what you get when you play on the beach. So get ready for that. You know, you want to swing. You know, you got to swing. You got to do that. At some point, you got to let go of it. And then, of course, once you let go of it, you're going to cuss the ball because it's not going to go where you want it to go. And remember, it's never your fault. It's always the equipment. Okay? So don't ever feel like you're to blame and say, look, I had better bocce balls. It would work. So people have asked, you know, well, what happens if I sign up? Well, first of all, you're guaranteed to play at least 3 games. If you're very good, you get to play more than 3 games. You're going to get a T-shirt. You're going to get a boxed lunch, and you're going to get free beverages, including beer. When you say the words free beer, that gets people's attention. I had an opportunity to go on 107.5 The Game to talk about something else, but they let me promote the Bocce Bash, and I think they talked about the free beer for pretty much about 5 or 10 minutes after I left my interview, so that really seemed to help their ratings, and they've asked me to come back for some reason. But I also want to go over some of the unwritten rules. They're not in the FAQs. You know, it's called the Bocce Bash, and you're going to get frustrated. But whatever you do, please don't throw the balls at your opponents. We don't need to be losing any more members here at the Rotary Club due to, you know, obviously any injuries. Don't distract the players while they're you know, getting ready to bowl. Don't scream, "You the man," or "I'm the one who hit your car," or "Your fly is down." You know, be respectful while people are bowling. And finally, you know, I remember President Stephen once saying that you can drink while playing. That's kind of the fun. But understand, if you spill your drink, that's a 1-point deduction. If you spill someone else's drink, 2-point deduction. If you spill your spouse's drink, couch. Okay? I'm just wanting to understand what the rules are. And finally, you know, the Fireflies have been nice enough to add some prizes to the winners. If you win, you're the first place team, you get unlimited mustard on all your hot dogs all season long. Second place, you get to play outfield for the Mets. And in third place, they get 15 minutes in the bouncy house, uninterrupted, with the person of their choice. I really like that one. And of course, there's a tradition here at Rotary, if you finish last, there's going to be a prize for that too. You're going to get to be Mason the mascot during all-day games during July and August. So you know when to finish last. So, like last year, I'm coordinating volunteers for sort of our big fundraiser. I did it for the golf tournament last year. And I've promised this year I'm going to avoid some of the pitfalls I fell into last year. Now, I was a fairly new member of Rotary then, still am, but this service above self thing wasn't really spelled out very clearly to me. So now I really do understand that it means that I can't set up volunteers to get my dry cleaning, to pick up takeout at Applebee's for me, and most of all, I can't ask people to do my taxes. So this year, what we really need is some help for people to help set up the day before, to help with registration, handing out T-shirts, that kind of thing, and most importantly, we'll need judges for the courts. So obviously to help all these legal disputes, and of course I hope a law degree will not be required. You know, it's a great opportunity for the whole family. If you've got kids who need to get some volunteer service points, obviously this is a way to do that, so I'd also recommend that as well, which I'm doing in my own home. And you know, you also get some of the perks that the players get. You're going to get a T-shirt, you're going to get lunch, and free beer. So there you go. That's a great advertisement for that. So see me about some of those wonderful opportunities, and I'll probably be bugging you again in the near future. But you know, when you're thinking about what you're going to do for volunteering, just remember one thing, that my taxes aren't going to get prepared on their own. So if anyone wants to step up. So thank you, and good luck, and please register for the Bocce Bash.
Thank you, Andy. It was a great plug. And also Friday, I listened to you on the radio. You did a great job, and we got a lot of good free publicity for the Bocce Bash. The FAQs that Andy mentioned are on all the tables. They're also out front. You saw Blake Buchanan standing out there next to a sign-up board. The sponsorships have come along long way very quickly, so I'm very happy with that. So now it's time for our club to put our money where our mouth is, so to speak, and sign up to play. So we're signing up to volunteer, or any way you would like to support our club's fundraiser. We're really looking forward to it. So see me, see Blake, see any members of the bocce committee if you have any questions about it. But you'll be hearing more and more about it as April 27th approaches. So you may be wondering what this house is. It's bigger than a birdhouse and smaller than a doghouse. This is a free little library, and I'd like to welcome Doug Cochran back up to the podium. He's going to tell you about this project that he and Sandra Owensby have taken on, and it's exciting.
Good afternoon. How's everyone? We, as a committee, and we'll introduce them here in just a moment, wanted to look into the Little Free Library program. It's an international program where you build a big birdhouse and you put some books in it and you post it out in a community, around the communities. And there are several of these already in Columbia, but we found another location that I'll share with you here in just a moment as well to go ahead and try this out. We plan to have our club logo on here, as well as a sign for the program. It's an official program. And get your birdhouse gets certified, and they'll have a sign on that as well explaining what it is. It's basically a take a book, leave a book program. So we're going to ask the membership, and we'll get back to you a little bit later on this, to contribute some books to get it started, kind of a jump start on that. And we're going to go ahead and put it out at, it's called the True Gospel Ministries. It's over on Skyland Drive, just across the river there. And that'll be our first location. And we're going to do this on a trial basis and see how that goes. One of the pieces of this program is to have a steward or folks watching over it, just to kind of keep an eye on things. And that the church there has agreed to do that for us. I'm guessing within probably the next several weeks, hopefully we'll get this put out and have it loaded. But again, we'll talk to you about the details about the book itself. I'd like to thank the committee itself, if they could stand when I introduce you. Sandra Owensby is our chair. She's here today. And Karen Blackman is here. I think Odessa Brinkman is here. I don't think Kay Shaw is here. She's also on the committee as well. And they've done a wonderful job of running this to ground, doing the research, finding a location, and trying to make things happen. I think Cindy suggested that we maybe at least on the initial set of books, let's put little Columbia Rotary Club stickers on there to kind of be a little bit of advertising and awareness about who we are and that we're helping the community. And you just never know where this. It's just like business cards. You never know where they're going to go and who they impact around that. But that's kind of our program. Do we have any questions about this? This has been going on for several months. Yes, sir. Hardbound or paperback, either or. The only thing we're going to ask, and again we'll get more details out to the membership, is it has to be rated G, because children will have access to this. So we envision having G-rated adult books as well as children's books and such here. This, depending on the size of the books, this will hold about 40 to 50 books, depending on the size of the books. We made the middle a little bit taller, because some of the children's books are tall, and so we can at least have that access in there. It's supposed to be waterproof, so if it rains or whatever, the books aren't going to get wet and that type of thing. So there's lots of little hints that they put out for us as we're putting this program together. Any other questions for us? Yes, Elliott.
Who built your house?
I did. I had some moral support, but I tinker around occasionally, and I had some leftover materials from a tree house I built to grandkids, so this is where it ended up right here. Any other questions? Thank you all very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Doug, once again for your leadership, and Sandra. This is such a great project. Sandra came to me several months ago with the idea, and when you get to be president, you have to learn what you're going to accept on the spot and what you want to hear a little more information about. And so I asked for a little bit more information, and then I didn't hear anything for a little while. And a couple weeks ago at the meeting, Doug was out here with this house that he built, So she put together the committee, found the right person to build a quality free little library, and now we're going to put it to good use in the community somewhere, and I just want to thank you both for all you've done for this. And now I'm going to invite Carolyn Matthews up to introduce our speaker.
Thank you, President Stephen. It is my great pleasure today to introduce to all of you Elliott Daniels. Elliott is to my right, and he is currently with the U.S. Attorney's Office. We're very fortunate to have him because he was born in the great state of North Carolina to our north, but he went to Hilton Head to practice his tennis, which he has a great love of, and the family decided to move to tennis because both boys were so very good at tennis. We're thrilled that he came here and that he became such a great tennis player. They got a scholarship to George Washington University, as did his brother. Not just that, he met his wife Amber at a tennis clinic at Hilton Head when he was 14, and she and her two sisters had tennis scholarships. She played for Sanford and then for college in Charleston, so we're in the presence of some greats here. In fact, I'm told that Elliott has once played tennis with Serena Williams. But we're very thrilled that he went to George Washington University, and at that, while he was there, he was exposed to a course which had to do with human trafficking, one of the last courses he took there. And he became and so intrigued with the idea that he went to work with the International Justice Mission, which and was sent to South Sudan for a full year. They worked with civil rights lawyers to help local law enforcement departments build cases against modern traffickers. And as I said, the course that he took at Georgetown was called Human Trafficking and Its Prevalence in the United States. So after he finished with the International Justice Mission, he went to George Washington Law School. While there, he clerked at the Department of Justice and at the International Center for Missing and Exploited Children. And again, we were fortunate he came to Columbia and practiced with the law firm of Murphy and Grantland for 5 years, and that immediately before he came to Columbia, he was asked to serve on the South Carolina Human Trafficking Task Force, which was being formed at the time by Attorney General Allen Wilson. And he and the firm provided direct legal assistance to more than 24 survivors of human trafficking. He has recently gone with the U.S. Attorney's Office here in Columbia, where he prosecutes violent crime out of the Columbia office, including trafficking matters. He has also been instrumental in creating a group called, his acronym is LAST, L-A-S-T, Legal Assistance for Survivors of Trafficking, a group of lawyers across the state who help with that. And so Elliott is going to tell us what he does and how you can help.
Judge Matthews, thank you very much. First, I have to say you all are brave inviting a lawyer to a lunch meeting. This can put anybody to sleep, a lawyer from the microphone. And to Mr. Monk and Mr. Shane, anything I get wrong is attributed to me. Everything I get right is attributed to U.S. Attorney White. I'll also say before I start that I'm the son of a Rotary president in our small town in eastern North Carolina. And so I remember being 5, 8 years old, running around these rooms, and so the wonder is now that one of these rooms has given me a microphone. But it's a special and personal pleasure to be back with you all. It does bring back good memories of my childhood. I'm an assistant U.S. attorney. For those of you who are not lawyers or criminal defendants, that means we're the feds. We are the federal prosecutors in South Carolina. And I prosecute violent crimes out of the Columbia office, including human trafficking matters. I'm going to speak with you a bit today about what trafficking is, what it is not, and how our office responds to it, and also what you can do about it. The one rule I'll give you before I jump in is that I'd love for you guys to interrupt me, raise your hand, ask questions. I would love for this to be a discussion, a conversation to the extent we can, rather than you all simply hearing from me things you don't need to hear. If something comes to mind, please do raise your hand. Let's see if technology works here. First question is, what is human trafficking? If you're like many folks in the public, this might be the first image you think of. And I hate to break it to you, unfortunately, none of us are quite as impressive as Liam Neeson. And unfortunately, the image that the popular media does put out about human trafficking is not exactly a reflection of what we see in our state. A more realistic view of human trafficking I like to think of is this picture. Traffickers see, they don't see state lines, they don't see county lines, they don't see national boundaries, they see markets. Trafficking is fundamentally an economic crime. You may know, of course, as many students of history in here, that there are days in the past where slavery was motivated by things other than profit. It may have been motivated by race or by tribalism. Today, modern slavery is primarily motivated by profit. It is big business, it's profitable, and that's why we're seeing in our office, for example, organized crime and gangs like the Bloods and the Crips shift from just selling bricks of cocaine, for example, to now selling people. You can sell a brick of cocaine once, and it's dangerous to sell it because the penalties are harsh. But you can sell a person over and over and over for many days on end. Fundamentally, it's a profitable crime. I want you to think of trafficking as primarily motivated by profit. It's a $150 billion a year industry, the fastest growing black market crime, and the third largest in the world. There are three myths I want to cover with you. First myth is that victims of trafficking are either foreign-born or that trafficking requires transportation. Just in the name trafficking, you think of movement, right? Well, we know that what's important for you all to know is that movement is not required. A victim of trafficking can be trafficked out of his or her own home in his or her own town. And we've seen that in our office, and I've seen that in the survivors I've represented. And this is an important, very important myth to dispel. I'll tell you anecdotally, I had a judge tell me once, Elliott, I've seen victim of or person charged with solicitation or prostitution in my courtroom over and over and over again, but none of them have ever been victims of human trafficking. And I thought, that's pretty amazing. How do you know that? And he said, because none of them are children and none of them are foreign nationals. The law does not require a victim be a child or a victim be a foreign national. It does not require transportation. I think that the two concepts that often get conflated, you may have heard this in this current immigration debate regarding our southern border. Have any of you heard a conflation between human smuggling and human trafficking? I think that often you hear those terms used interchangeably. Well, they're two very different things, and it's important for you to keep those concepts separate. Human smuggling is a crime against borders, and the persons involved can be documented or typically undocumented, but it's a crime against borders and it involves transportation, and those involved can be either voluntary or involuntarily involved. Trafficking, on the other hand, has nothing to do with borders. Citizens and non-citizens can be involved. It's always involuntary, and it is fundamentally a crime against a person, and it's about exploitation and abuse, not about a border. The second myth is that trafficking requires physical restraint. This is a Google image. If you type in human trafficking and you select the images tab, these are the top results for human trafficking in Google. And this is a problem because this sends all the wrong message, right? You see chains, you see fences, you see hands bound, and you see a hand across the face. And this is a critical myth to dispel. I mean, I often have family members, friends, folks in the community who come up to me and always ask that question, where was the lock? Why the door wasn't locked? Couldn't he or she leave? Well, that's not what trafficking requires. And to understand this concept, I think it's important to understand a seminal case. And I'll try not to bore you all because I know no one wants to hear about case law, but there is a critical case from 1988 that I'd love to share with you. In it, it's called U.S. v. Kosminski. It went up to the United States Supreme Court. In it, a man who's a dairy farmer in the upstate New York found himself a mentally handicapped man that he could put in a shed behind his house and work on his dairy farm. At first for $15 a week, and eventually for no pay at all. He lived in the shed. He was kept there, and he worked for years on end for no pay at all, under the threat that he would be reinstitutionalized. He said, I'll send you back to the institution you came from unless you work for me. Well, that was enough to compel the labor out of this man, and not to be outdone, his wife then found a female mentally handicapped adult, put her in the same shed, and forced her to work under the threat of reinstitutionalization. Well, they were prosecuted by our counterparts near the dairy farm. They were found guilty of felonies, violation of federal forced labor statutes, and the 13th Amendment, which students of history might remember is the right to be free. That's the amendment passed in 1864 that said we cannot force folks to work in our country for no pay. Well, after those felony convictions, they were appealed up to the U.S. Supreme Court, and the moderate, eminent, widely respected Justice O'Connor wrote for a unanimous Supreme Court, reversed 9-0, sent it back to the district court, and said, because there was no physical restraint, there is no violation of forced labor statutes. And it horrified the human rights community, it horrified the public, that there had to be chains. Without chains, there was no conviction. So this married couple pled to misdemeanors, and they were found guilty of misdemeanors, and they were allowed to go free. Well, Congress fixed this, as they do with all eminent speed. I can say that because my wife used to work on the Hill. They fixed this 12 short years later with the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. Thank you for your speed, Amber. And critically, the law now does not require physical restraint. Do not look for physical restraint. Do not look for locks. Do not look for bars. Do not look for cages, which is what you see in these images. Instead, you look for vulnerabilities and vulnerabilities exploited. You look for coercion. What does coercion look like? This is probably one of the most complicated concepts in trafficking that you'll come across and that we deal with in a case-by-case basis. I believe if I did not pass over the definition of human trafficking, I'll go back to what does coercion look like. But here are the definitions of human trafficking. On the sex trafficking side, you typically look for a commercial sex act secured by force, fraud, or coercion. Force is easy to show. Fraud is easy to show. That's a promise of one thing. You've got something very different. But coercion is very difficult to show, and it's very fact-specific. If you look at the forced labor side, which is where that married couple would have been prosecuted under a statute today, and you'll hear in a moment, our office has prosecuted recently a very similar case in our state. It also, one of the elements is also coercion. What does coercion look like? This is what coercion looks like in our state, and it's probably the most complex dynamic we see in these cases. You look for a manipulation of the free will, you look for a lack of agency, and critically the analysis is to put yourself in the shoes of the victim, not in your shoes. It's not enough to say, if I was there, I could have left. If I was there, I could have walked away. Instead, you look at it through the lens of the victim. You look for threats of harm to the person or threats of harm to another person, any person at all. I had a case where a wife was being trafficked by her husband. Her husband sold children for sex, and he's now in federal prison for it. But when the U.S. Attorney's Office in another state looked to her to be a cooperating witness and say, tell the court what you saw, tell the court about his practices, he said, if you do, I'll kill our 3 mutual children together. And so what do you think she did? She didn't talk. She didn't cooperate. And that threat of, I will kill our 3 mutual children together, are threats. And with those threats is how he secured her commercial sex. In fact, even when he was in federal prison, the family continued this dynamic, would never allow her to be in the same room with all 3 of her children. And there are even instances of them locking her children up in rooms and binding her children to furniture so that she could never be with all of her children together. That's what threats look like. Look for psychological manipulation and control. One of my clients told me that her trafficker was the greatest psychologist on earth. He knew exactly what her vulnerabilities were, and he knew how to speak to them. I had an investigator out of Charleston tell me that when they prosecuted a case I was not involved in, the trafficker, they were able to secure his internet history, right? They were able to see how he recruited victims on social media. And what he did is he sent this same message to, I think he said more than 100 young women, young girls. And it was, hey, you're beautiful, I would love to spend time with you, okay? And so for the majority of these young girls, they did not respond as they should. But to those who did, he saw a vulnerability, and he saw a young person who needed that affirmation. And so look for that manipulation, look for that control. You also see separation, isolation, humiliation, degradation. I'll talk to you in a case, I'll talk to you in a moment about a case our office was prosecuted where humiliation and degradation was a means of control. Importantly, and I'll also point finally to that last flag, foreign national victims have their own particular vulnerabilities. And I've been involved in cases where the foreign national victims are told, the police are not on your side. If you call the police, you'll be arrested. If you call the police, you'll be deported. And they might come from a context where that's believable. They might come from a context in another country where the police are not on their side, right? They don't know their rights or have access to their rights. And so there's a manipulation of the law or abuse of the legal process. And so foreign national victims have that particular vulnerability. So this is what coercion looks like. And so in the sex context, you'll see a victim is subjected to commercial sex and enforced labor. Someone is subjected to forced labor by coercion. So this is a difficult thing to show. The third myth is, do you have any questions?
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
In the movies, they always show the victims as like drugged. Is that a form of coercion?
Yeah, that's a great question. The question was, in the movies, they always show victims drugged. Is that a form of control or coercion? I will say that there is a pretty harrowing intersection between our opioid crisis and human trafficking, where access to drugs and the abuse of withdrawal symptoms are means of control. So I had one case where a victim was addicted to heroin, and her trafficker was her drug dealer, and he knew it. And he knew what she would do for access to heroin. And so what he did is he sold her to other customers to settle drug debts, to make profit himself. And so the use of drugs, the manipulation of her addiction, and the extreme effect that withdrawal from heroin would have on her was what he used to sell her into the sex trafficking trade. And so you do see the use of drugs. Now, in movies like Taken, you might see a victim who's drugged and disoriented. Sure, we have seen that. I think more often we see the abuse of access to drugs as a means of control. Yeah, that's a great question. The third myth is that victims cannot wait to be rescued, and they say, "Thank you, you have rescued me, you're my savior." Unfortunately, this just does not happen. Victims readily self-identify. That also does not happen. Often, we're many months into the process of representation, of direct representation of a survivor, and they still don't understand what happened to them was human trafficking. They still don't understand what happened to them was wrong. And why? You need someone much smarter than me. You need a psychologist up here and not me. Someone who's trained in trauma and not me. But I will tell you that many of the victims are children. Many of the victims are abused by people they love. Many of the victims are sold or recruited by their own family members. And many also have their intellectual disabilities. So there's a number of dynamics and reasons why victims don't self-identify. And once they do, they don't want to testify against someone who they thought they loved, someone who they thought was their boyfriend, their spouse, in the case I mentioned earlier. I've already covered what the federal definition of human trafficking is. And so what I'd say to look for in South Carolina, first of all, these are images that show where, these are cases our office has prosecuted. These are locations where individuals have been both recruited and trafficked in our state. So look for vulnerabilities and look for vulnerabilities exploited. Movement's not required, smuggling's not required, physical restraint is not required, and it does not matter if the victim self-identifies. The context in which you see this is broad. An organization I used to work for in Washington, D.C. has identified 25 different contexts in which trafficking occurs in the United States. This is an organization called Polaris Project that operates the national hotline. So they queried years of data of reports coming into the national hotline and said, these are the different industries that are affected by forced labor. These are the different industries that are affected by trafficking in our country. Data. Data is a question we always get. What is the prevalence? Where is it most common? Where is it most prevalent? Data is something we're always missing in this fight. The reason why is because fundamentally this is a black market economy. This is an illegal underground crime. But we do have some data from a 2017 annual report from the AG's office and a 2018 annual report from the AG's office. I think critically in this 2017 report, what happened was all the national hotline reports that came in were sent back to the AG's office and they evaluated it for the most common relationships between the recruiter and the victim and the most common relationship between the trafficker and the victim. And as you'll see, the most common relationship is family member, second is employer, fourth is intimate partner. And if you look at the method of recruitment, again, you see family member, and then down there you see intimate partner. We see this familial traffic dynamic often, and it's another reason why victims either are reluctant to self-identify, or once they are identified, they're reluctant to testify. We have some numbers from a 2018 report that came out in December, and these are the counties that have the highest reported cases of trafficking in our state. The number of, if you look at the top right, it says counties with the most reported incidents. Richland County, our county, is number 1, and if you look at the most common exploiter-victim relationship at the bottom left, it's changed from family member up to employer. I'll also note that there's a piece of data on here that's not on this slide, but the counties with the most pending human trafficking cases at the state level, not the federal level, but the state level, is Richland County with 53% of the pending cases in our state. That, I think, is important to know that that's a reflection, I believe, of cases that have been identified and not necessarily a reflection of prevalence. Any questions? Yes, Elliott.
Elliott, I would say that with the criminal justice system in the U.S. being so sophisticated, that would kind of limit the types of human trafficking crimes that can occur here successfully. I would think that the types of human trafficking that we all imagine are happening more often in other countries where they don't have such sophisticated abilities to catch people and prosecute them.
Sure.
Is that your experience, or do you have data on that?
Yeah, and so the question is, because we have such a sophisticated criminal justice system, does it happen more overseas where there are not as sophisticated criminal justice systems versus here? Speaking in my old capacity, working with International Justice Mission, that's precisely what they do. They go to foreign countries, they go to developing countries, and help them develop their public justice system so they can respond to issues like trafficking effectively. And what we would see at IJM is, in many countries, the public justice system simply did not work for the poor, and they could not count on their public justice systems to hold traffickers accountable. And so you hear stats, for example, where there's 27 million in modern slavery today, which is more enslaved than have ever been enslaved in any time in human history. Of the 27 million, there's another stat that says 39 million, but even going with the more conservative number, more than 12 million of those are in the South Asian subcontinent, India and Pakistan. And so those are often in the forced labor context where indentured servitude is passed on generationally. Grandparents, parents, and children are all indebted to the same family members and work in the same brick kilns and same rice mills. And so yes, that is a dynamic you see overseas, but what's also true, and you'll hear in these cases, that it also happens here. We've had clients from the Philippines, but we've also, me in my private capacity, have had clients from the Philippines, but I've also had clients from Forest Acres. I've had clients who live down by the hospital where our child was born. And I've had clients from several different counties, one from Lexington County. I can think of another from Greenville County, from Spartanburg County, another from Richland County, so it does happen here. But prevalence is a great question. Does it happen more often overseas? It might. Yes, ma'am?
Does it happen more often in the inner city or the rural communities?
I like to think of it as market driven. And so wherever traffickers can make money off of their victims is where this trade will go. And so yes, it might be towards cities, towards Atlanta, Charlotte, Charleston, Orangeburg, Columbia are all within driving distance. And we see cases where victims are driven between those cities because they can be sold for 5 days here, 7 days there, 3 days there, and brought back. And that is in the sex trafficking context. Now think about the forced labor context, where someone might be working in the agricultural trade, someone might be working in the hospitality industry, someone might be working on the peach farms that we have in our state in Edgefield, McCormick County. Those victims might not necessarily be moved around, and those victims might be victimized in rural contexts. So the first rule is there's no rule. It can happen anywhere. Yes?
Interesting, over the weekend I was reading Sports Illustrated current issue, and there's one page, it's an article, it's really a forum for a woman who wrote this. I'm pretty sure it's a woman. She was citing the case of Robert Kraft down in Florida. Basically, he's been charged, I think, 2 misdemeanors, but she said that the police there, because these are basically sex crimes, are overreaching by bringing trafficking in to something they created as a way to try to get, I guess, to the higher ups. I mean, I read the thing and I was confused. I couldn't understand what she's representing as a group, but I don't remember. She said we're with some group. Is it true that there could really be a group, legal or otherwise, to be opposed to the expansion of using the trafficking outlet to try to arrest these people?
Oh, absolutely.
Have you read the article or seen that?
I haven't read the article, but there are folks who oppose efforts like what you saw in Florida. There's also plenty of folks who advocate for the legalization of commercial sex. Of course, now in my professional capacity, I can't give you as many opinions as I could 6 months ago or 8 months ago on that, but I'll try to provide some illumination to what's happened in Florida. What we do see is human trafficking does happen in the illicit massage parlor context. These are, first, not all prostitution is trafficking. You have to have coercion, you have to have exploitation before it moves from commercial sex to human trafficking. In the illicit massage parlor context, in the nail salon context, just like many other sort of niche industries where the employees have language barriers and cultural barriers to the outside world, I think that there's a heightened risk of vulnerability there, where the employees might not have access to their rights, they might not have access to law enforcement or the law. And so there have been instances where employees in the massage parlors that we see in our state that do not reflect a legitimate business, right? They have locks on the outside, they have heightened security, they have cameras on the outside, they have odd hours, they sell below market. So these don't exactly look like the massage parlors you can send your spouse for their birthday. There is forced labor in these contexts, and there is both forced labor, forced to work in the massage parlor context, and forced commercial sex, where they may be forced to sell sex in this context. Robert Kraft was charged, of course, with solicitation. That has nothing to do with our office, and I frankly don't know a lot about Florida law. But there's also folks who advocate to address demand specifically, and they say that the human trafficking trade, particularly in the sex context, is driven by demand. And the dollars that people pour into these massage parlors and commercial sex is what makes this industry profitable in the first place. And so you're seeing in some states a shift of focus from the victims and the trafficker to the buyer. Keep in mind, there's always three people. There's a seller, there's a person who's being exploited, and there's a buyer. And so you're seeing a shift in focus, particularly at the state level, not at the federal level, not in our office, but in some states you're seeing a shift at the state level to the buyer, because the belief is that it's the buyers who fuel this trade. Does that make sense? Yeah.
When does a case become federal and when does it state handle?
Yeah, when does it become federal versus state? Typically, there has to be a federal interest or federal nexus. Mr. Monk could probably explain that better than me. But the question is crossing state lines. The question is there use of a wire? Is there use of technology? Is there use of the internet? And so when it affects what we call when there is an interstate nexus, when there is a crossing of state lines or use of interstate commerce, that's when our office can become involved. If it's a purely local crime, you'll see someone like the Solicitor's Office or the Attorney General's Office prosecute.
Would local police make prostitution arrests? Do they grill the prostitute if she's willing to talk about trafficking? Is there trafficking involved, or that's something they don't really look at?
Well, I mean, I think that would be a different answer in the different jurisdictions you ask. I mean, even in our state, look at our own city alone. We have City of Forest Acres, you have Columbia Police Department, you have Richland County, you have West Columbia, you have Lexington, and these are all overlapping state and local jurisdictions, and that's a practice question that would have to be asked to each one of those local agencies. But that's a great question. Yeah. In the last few minutes, I'd love to share with you what our office has done in response. United States versus Bobby Paul Edwards is a forced labor case based out of Conway. The victim, we'll refer to by his initials of JCS, is a 41-year-old African-American man with an IQ of below 70, which is the functional capacity of an 8-year-old. He has a 9th grade education. He worked for 24 years in a restaurant called J&J Cafeteria out of Conway. He began working there when he was a child. And for the last the restaurant was managed by the same family, first by, I believe it's relatives of Bobby Paul Edwards. For the last 5 years of his 24 years of employment at J&J Cafeteria, he worked every day. The restaurant was open every hour of every day for 5 years for no pay at all. Bobby Paul Edwards was charged with forced labor. He kept JCS in the back of the restaurant. There was an apartment attached to the restaurant that JCS lived in, and the means by which Bobby Paul Edwards secured this forced labor was force, violence. There were beatings with restaurant equipment. There was an instance where Bobby Paul Edwards dipped metal tongs in hot boiling grease, placed it on the victim's neck, and caused burns. Employees would say they heard beatings. He would go behind the back of the restaurant and they would hear Bobby Paul Edwards beat JCS with belts and with other instrumentalities. There were threats, and so by the last 5 years he worked for approximately 100 hours a week, 12 to 16 hours a day from 6 a.m. to 11 p.m. Every day the restaurant was open for no pay at all. And this went on for 5 years. And the reason that JCS was identified and he's no longer in this forced labor situation is because the aunt of a waitress, a relative of a waitress, saw something and she said, it doesn't look right, and I'm going to say something. I'm going to call the authorities because this doesn't look right. But for that aunt of that waitress, I wonder if that victim would still be in that forced labor today. And that's our challenge to you today, is to not be afraid to say something if you see something that's wrong. In June of this year, the restaurateur pled guilty, and he's awaiting sentencing where he'll face up to 20 years in federal prison and a $250,000 fine. Finally, I see my minutes are winding up. I have one more case I can share with you all, but if you have questions, I know Stephen has told me he'll pull me off the stage at 1:30 if I'm still talking. Yes.
I know that Salvation Army has put together a program in North Carolina to work with y'all, and we're trying to put one here in Columbia. That individual you just cited is a good example of someone, we win the case, but what happens to that individual? They don't have a place to live. How do they survive after that?
And so the question is, what about the victims after the conviction? So justice, in my view, is not just a conviction, not just putting the perpetrator behind bars, but also is the outcome of the victims matter. So they're direct service providers that I hope clubs like this do champion and do support financially and otherwise. And those direct service providers are here in Columbia, and they do support victims like this. They help them get jobs, they help them with training, certification, clear criminal records, clothing, tangible needs, transportation. And so there's a number of direct service providers. I'd love to give you or Stephen their name, and I hope that organizations like this and the businesses you all represent could champion direct service providers that do come alongside the victims during the prosecution and after the conviction.
Yeah, I've got a 16-year-old daughter, and I have been told by her and her mother that there was an issue with Columbian law, trafficking there, abductions. Is that true?
I don't know the answer to that question. The question was, is Columbian law dangerous? I don't know the answer to that question. But I'm glad that she has parents who care enough to ask and stay involved. Yeah.
Just last thing, I work with a client in Washington, Global Centurion, who does a lot of work in trafficking. And some of the work that we were doing was focusing with pharmacists because they're one of the front line individuals that human trafficking people go to for health support. What are some of the steps that when we see something like that and we think that there's an issue, what are the steps that we can put into place to alert the authorities that there's a problem? Because these victims would seek help with their pharmacists at CVS, but because they're so heavily controlled and their handler is right there with them, they have to walk out with them. They're controlled.
Sure, that's a great question. So what can you do as a public? Here's 6 points I'll leave you. This is in my personal capacity. This is certainly no request from my employer. I would love to see, to answer your question would be number 6. The National Human Trafficking Hotline number is at the bottom. It's operated 24 hours a day, and the language capacity is pretty remarkable. Some of the most successful partnerships I've seen are businesses that offer in-kind gifts to direct service providers. I've seen marketers tell direct service providers, we can do your marketing for you, we can create signs for you, we can promote your work. What you're doing here today, getting involved, awareness raising, volunteering your time, offering jobs to survivors, there's a number of things you can do. There's the national hotline. I encourage you to continue to welcome in direct service providers who are on the front lines of this work for survivors. And if there's anything I can do, let me know. I'll be up here. Here's my contact. Thank you.
Elliott, thank you so much for being here today. It was a very impressive presentation. Thank you for bringing this to our attention. I know I speak on behalf of the club when I say we hope you are wildly successful prosecuting these sorts of individuals who would manipulate others. This is a small token of our appreciation for being here today. We are going to forego singing in the interest of time, but next week our speaker is Wally Amos from Famous Amos Cookies. So it should be a lot of fun. Y'all have a great week and come back next Monday.